If you're an English speaker, this should look familiar. We call it the Latin alphabet, and it's the most widely used script in the world, but there are several other scripts, some of which you might recognize. Not every writing system is an alphabet, though. Japanese, for example, makes use of two syllabaries, called hiragana and katakana respectively. Languages use different scripts for a variety of reasons, but is there any way to measure whether one is objectively better than another? The short answer is no, but we can analyze some of the subjective factors that cause someone to have a preference or bias. Objectivity versus subjectivity. It's impossible to measure language or writing system superiority through objective or unbiased means. There are simply too many factors at play. Reading speeds, for example, vary between individuals and depend on the level of familiarity with the script. Then there's the structure of the system itself. How efficient is it at encoding information, and how long does it take to write the characters? Can the script be simplified so that it remains legible in a smaller font? And can it be adapted to screens and keyboards? You might also consider whether or not it's accessible to users with limited motor control, such as children, or how many unique characters have to be memorized. Even the aesthetic value plays a role. And then there's the ease of learning to consider. Maybe the script is really rare and therefore has fewer teaching materials available, or perhaps it's used by a very popular language. Have you heard of Hebrew? It has nearly 6 million users worldwide. Or maybe you recognize Hanzi, commonly called Chinese characters, used by over 1 billion people. You might have a favorite writing system, but no one can prove one to be the best. Some languages don't have one at all, and they get by just fine. But that does beg the question, if a language wanted to adopt a new system, which one might they choose?
When trying to rate writing systems, you have to choose a starting point. Remember the alphabet and kana we looked at earlier? Let's take a closer look at them. This is the word wasabi, written in English using the Latin alphabet. It's a spicy green root used in Japanese cuisine. Each of the 6 letters here represent a sound. The w is the first consonant, the a is the vowel after it, and so on. Each letter is either a consonant or a vowel, and they combine to create syllables. There are 26 symbols, but each one can represent multiple sounds. This means that memorizing the written characters will be easy, but figuring out which to pronounce at a time can be challenging, even for fluent speakers. Now this is the same word, wasabi, but in the Japanese syllabary. Each symbol here represents an entire syllable. There are almost 100 kana in the Japanese language. These kana only have one corresponding sound though, so there's no need to guess the pronunciation of each character when you see it. In addition to alphabets and syllabaries, there are a few other types of writing systems in the world. One of these is the abjad, a category that includes Arabic and Hebrew. Only consonants are represented here. Another one is the abugida. Examples of these include Devanagari, Thai, and Ge'ez. Consonants are prioritized, with vowels reduced to secondary modifications. Finally, you have logographies. Each symbol conveys no sound or phonological information at all. Instead, they convey morphological meanings. An example of this is Hanzi, more colloquially referred to as Chinese characters.
Languages are used to express a meaning, but they do it in a variety of ways. This makes them very hard to truly compare or rate on a scale of superiority. Comprehension on the L1 or L2 level cannot be used to measure it either, since that is also dependent on the learner themselves. In Avatar's study, they found that L1 Hebrew speakers generally read faster than L2 Hebrew speakers, but that they both understood the text equally. L1 Arabic speakers could read Arabic texts faster than L1 Hebrew speakers read Hebrew texts. A study performed by Sayegh Haddad found that both L1 Hebrew and L1 Arabic speakers read English at roughly the same speed, despite the differences in their native languages. This means that text comprehension must use a different thought process than reading. The results of Avatar's letter recognition tests support this too. The tests showed that while Hebrew speakers were nearly unaffected in their reading speed by nonsense words, Arabic speakers actually had to slow down to recognize the letters. In the experiment performed by Guavin and Holstein, they discovered that some individuals' reading speeds in their L2 was actually impacted less by degraded text than it was in their L1. Guavin and Holstein believe that this is caused more by reading speed than the extent of their vocabulary. Most individuals had to slow down their reading in both languages when they came across degraded text, though it occurred more strongly in L2 speakers. This showed how automatic information was processed in both L1 and L2 speakers, dividing those who truly knew the language from those who were still learning. Guavin and Holstein also argued that comparing reading speeds between languages is an inefficient method of measuring language comprehension, since writing systems and individual differences are such strong influences. When L1 speakers read slower or faster than others, it doesn't always mean they don't understand the text as well as another. It might just be that they're thinking harder on the meaning of the text or interpreting it differently. Efficiency isn't what matters in reading. Comprehension is. Besides, representing sounds isn't the only job of a writing system. Another criterion that we can use to measure superiority would be phonological transparency. In other words, do some writing systems better convey oral information than others? Let's look at this word, pronounced ikra. This is the Russian word for caviar, written in the Cyrillic alphabet. Now, the Japanese, with their fond love of seafood, decided to adopt the same word to refer to caviar. There was a problem, though.
Take a look at these two letters here, K and R. Together, they form the cluster gr. The Japanese syllabaries obey a strict consonant-vowel pattern. There are symbols for na, tu, go, for instance, but there is no symbol for consonant clusters. Unfortunately, this meant that a compromise had to be made when representing the sounds I, K, Ra, and A in succession. The word for these plump salmon eggs is therefore represented like this in kana, pronounced ikura. There is an obligatory epenthetic vowel inserted between the K and the R in order to avoid a consonant cluster. In short, a phonological sacrifice often has to be made in order to display words such as this one.
This does not necessarily entail a superior system, however. For instance, while consonant clusters cannot be accurately written in kana, this does not mean that kana is a bad writing system. It is able to fit the needs of the language that writes in it, namely Japanese, and so a very large inventory of all sorts of sound combinations would be excessive. Several studies and researchers have aimed to compare the effectiveness of representing languages in different writing systems, with some having more restrictions than others. This can ultimately affect language acquisition as well, especially when learning to read, because individuals may not be able to clearly associate the symbols on the page with the sounds they must produce. Geva and Park have observed this phenomenon in readers of Hebrew and Hangul, respectively.
Now, why would users of a writing system want to change to a new one? Well, there are actually many historical precedents for this process, also known as digraphia, where a language used one writing system before transitioning to a different one. Such languages include Turkish, Mongolian, Punjabi, Serbo-Croatian, and currently Kazakh. Karen, of the University of North Dakota, describes reasons for why this often occurs. They could be political or religious motivations, or an attempt to bring about closer ties with the surrounding nation that uses the writing system in question. Or perhaps it's an aesthetic preference, or a push to improve literacy amongst the population. For example, Vietnamese switched from using Chinese logographs to the Latin alphabet because they found that it was easier for the younger generations to pick up. So, what do you think? Is the Latin alphabet well deserving of its worldwide renown, or should another writing system take that number one spot? With so many factors to consider and so many languages to choose from, some people will obviously disagree. So next time you think about how pretty a language is, or how nice it would be to be able to read it, try it out. Remember, judging the superiority of a language is based on opinion and opinion alone, and it's best to form opinions with as much information as possible. So go ahead, start learning.